Could we do a sound check again, please?
Yeah. I'm going to check council first. Councilor Scully.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilor Smith.
Present.
Councilor Seitz. Here. Mayor Pro Tem DeMott.
Present.
Councilor Seymour.
Here.
And Councilor Bowles.
I'm here.
And I apologize, Mayor.
I hear it on the YouTube stream.
So do we restart? Okay. Click on the slideshow with your mouse or with your thing. Click on the one that is slide instead of the one that's on, and it'll make that larger. Yeah, just replace it. Do what I can.
I think we've got it now. I'm bringing on my phone. Oh, okay. Will you make the ordinance again? Sorry, I logged off because I was leaving. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. Tell me we have resolved the problem. Okay. Too many people. Thank you. Yeah, I was. They said it could roll out after things got rolling, and then yeah, I'm gonna be around. Okay.
Mayor, the issue's been resolved.
Thank you. Do I need to go back? Was the original first part missed? But imagine.
I think we should go back for, I'm unsure when it was recording, so I think we should probably go back.
Good evening. Welcome to the August 10th special study session of the Westminster City Council. Tonight we have 2 items on the agenda. Before we start, I'll ask the assistant or the acting city clerk to do the roll call.
And can everybody check their devices to make sure they're muted? Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Demott.
Present.
Mayor Sykes.
Here.
Councilor Seymour.
Here.
Councilor Scully. Here. Councilor Smith.
Present.
And Councilor Bowles.
Here.
Study sessions resumed in person on August 2nd, 2021. In light of the COVID-19 public health situation and to promote social distancing, study sessions will also continue to be offered online and virtually. Community members are encouraged to listen to the meeting via the traditional webcast or by calling in. Tonight we have, as I mentioned, 2 presentations. The first is on the American Rescue Plan Act and recommendations on how to spend those dollars. City Manager Tripp, will you please lead off this conversation?
Mayor, I'd simply like to introduce Michael Parlow, who will make a presentation to you on behalf of full staff.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council members. I'm Michael Parlow, policy budget analyst. And I have the privilege of presenting to you staff's recommendations for how to invest the $14.5 million in federal funds allocated to Westminster from the American Rescue Plan. Next slide. The American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, was signed into law on March 11th, 2021, to aid in the economic and social recovery from the pandemic. It provides $350 billion in direct relief to local governments in the form of state and local fiscal recovery fund, of which Westminster was allocated $14.5 million. We've received the first half of the funds already and expect the second half early next year. The guidelines for use of the funds are that it must be spent by the end of 2024 and be spent to, 1, respond to the COVID emergency and resulting economic impacts, reimburse for lost revenue due to the pandemic, make necessary investments in, quote, water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure, or lastly, to be used for premium or hazard pay to essential workers. Slide, please. It is staff's recommendation that the city utilize these funds to get reimbursed for lost revenue. This will minimize the administrative burden of expending the funds, make sure that we can allocate freed up funds to high impact projects, and will maximize the return on investment of federal dollars. This is similar to the way that we handled a large portion of the CARES funds that we received through public safety payroll during the pandemic. Also, after reviewing Treasury's guidelines and guidance that came out recently on how to calculate lost revenue during the pandemic, staff is confident we can safely claim the full $14.5 million in revenue backfill. If council agrees, staff will return to you with a resolution to codify this approach. Next slide, please. While the revenue backfill option would give us all manner of flexibility in spending the $14.5 million of freed up funds, staff recommends allocating it to projects that fit in the spirit of ARPA and make high impact investments that will save taxpayer dollars over many years to come. In looking at projects, staff used the following guiding principles. First, we wanted it to have lasting positive impacts and a large return on our investment for the city. We wanted to have fewer projects with greater impact for residents. We targeted projects outside or in addition to our current capital improvements program. And lastly, we wanted to make investments over the next 3 years or so to extend the impact of those projects. Next slide, please. So the process for identifying and prioritizing potential projects was that staff and departments, city manager's office, and policy and budget had many brainstorming meetings to identify projects that fit the previous guidelines. Departments then submitted many important projects that totaled over the $14.5 million. So we had to prioritize projects that best aligned with the guiding principles and had the greatest return and impact. Staff also recognized some submitted projects were probably better suited to be funded through the current CIP budget process. Then finally, after some further discussion with departments and CMO, staff compiled the recommended list as shown on the next slide. There. So this is the recommended list of projects and the rough spending plan of 2022 through 2024. So while we don't have yet all the needed data for exact return on investment numbers for each project, staff does believe that these projects have a significant cost-saving component in the long run. And now we'll go through each of the projects in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. The first and largest investment is the Water Conservation and Long-Term Water Utility Cost Savings Program at $7.5 million over 3 years. The overall aim of this program is to bring peak water need down across the city, as represented by this graph here showing summer peak usage driven in large part by irrigation. These major conservation efforts will reduce the required additional capacity for future water and wastewater infrastructure programs, including the second phase of Water 2025, directly leading to project savings. Further, any water demand reductions will have a positive impact across the entire system, such as reduction in cost of water rights, variable operations costs such as energy, chemicals, and the actual size of piping capacity needed. However, staff wants to make clear that this effort would not change the need for phase 1 of Water 2025, but would have longer-term cost savings to both operations and capital needs. In fact, we already know that conservation efforts have saved Westminster ratepayers substantially in the past. To quote from the 2014 study by Public Works, published in the Journal of American Waterworks Associations, copies were passed out before the meeting, quote, reduced water use in Westminster since 1980 has generated substantial savings in both water resource and infrastructure costs, saving residents and businesses 80% in tap fee increases and 91% in rate increases compared to what rates would have been without conservation, end quote. So this program will be a comprehensive strategy involving several departments and city stakeholders. It would include an enhanced public works conservation program, a large-scale parks, irrigation, and turf replacement program, xeriscaping of City Hall, and targeted acquisition of open space. Staff believes a program of this scale would be a first of its kind in the Front Range and hope it will serve as a model for other communities. Next slide. So to give a little more detail on each component of this larger effort, the Public Works Conservation Program would focus on replacing larger water-intensive landscapes across the city, as well as expanding the existing conservation programs. We work with HOAs across the city to do turf removal and xeriscaping, explore new programs such as irrigation system nozzle rebate, and expand existing programs like slow the flow consultations, lawn removal services, and of course our grass to garden program. This would also support a water demand management plan that would help analyze, track, and report on these efforts, impacts on future investments and infrastructure plan. And lastly, just to give you an example, as you see on the slide here, of how these conservation projects save the utility substantial money over time. It costs less than $3,000 for the single-family home lawn removal program to save an acre-foot of water over 10 years, while that same acre-foot costs, at the very least, $30,000 in Clear Creek water rights. Next slide, please. The next major component of this program is parks irrigation and turf replacement. This investment would represent the first phase of replacing irrigation systems and putting in water-saving plants and natural grasses in 63 parks over the next 5 to 7 years. This would have direct savings to the city, as 1 acre of turf removed equals about 1.5 acre feet of water, which is half a million gallons, and that's saved annually. If we applied this to just 20% of parks turf, this would save 40 million gallons of water and $300,000 a year at current water rates. It would also have the same major benefits as the public works programs in reducing peak water need and saving water ratepayers in the future. And as you can see, PRNL already has identified several shovel-ready projects listed on this slide. Next slide, please. Similar to the parks program, the city would convert the acres of water-intensive grass at City Hall to a less costly and more natural landscape. This would be done in partnership with the conservation nonprofit, Western Resource Advocates. Not only is this a money-smart decision, but we believe that City Hall should be a leading example of water conservation. The final component of this program is to purchase small, targeted parcels of open space that would help dewater those areas. This, of course, has added benefits to our citizens and the future of open space in Westminster. Next slide. So moving from water and to another key part of our infrastructure, this recommended project is to increase our investment in street improvements by $4 million additional over the next 3 years. This will help cover the gap in necessary investment to maintain our streets and better take care of what we own. Examples of major street projects that are in the pipeline that these funds could help get done are all mill and overlay projects at Sheridan from 92nd to 96th, 112th from Federal to Sheridan, and 144th from I-25 to Huron. These projects will bring real, tangible improvements to our infrastructure and help close a gap as much needed. Next slide. The next recommended project is to change what type of vehicles are used on those newly paved streets. We want to jumpstart the city's fleet conversion to electric vehicles with an investment of $900,000 over 3 years. This investment will save on fuel and maintenance costs and reduce the city's carbon footprint. This would include new electric-ready service and charging stations at 3 city facilities, and an addition of about 20 electric vehicles. While comparable electric vehicle sedans currently cost more upfront, they provide significant savings in cost per mile when taking reduced maintenance, repair, and fuel costs into account. An EV costs roughly about 54% of a gas-powered sedan to run on a per-mile basis, and this will add up as our light and medium fleet drives more than 2 million miles a year. Next slide, please. The following recommendation is to make improvements to public safety facilities and vehicles at an estimated $800,000 over the next 2 years. This includes an investment in the fire department storage building to protect critical fire apparatus and equipment. Staff will also review additional opportunities with remaining funds to support public safety facility and vehicle needs. Next slide. The next investment is to make our council meetings more accessible and to increase transparency and communication across the city. The estimated $1 million over the next 2 years would be an investment in live streaming technology in council chambers to make sure residents have access to high-quality audio and video of city council meetings, as well as equipment and technology to support off-site streaming, and the production of more video content to increase awareness, accessibility, and engagement with citizens. The last recommendation, next slide. Thank you. The last recommendation is for $300,000 in additional funds for the Human Services Board over the next 2 years. As we saw during the height of the pandemic, HSB was very successful in distributing an additional $100,000 in CARES funds. Staff is seeing that 2022 requests suggest a higher level of demand for support. Staff will request HSB to make recommendations to Council on how to best invest an additional $150,000 for both 2022 and 2023 in our community. Thanks so much for your attention. This presentation. I just want to note that we're joined by a few of the key principals that would be directing a large portion of these recommended projects. Public Works Director Max Kirschbaum, General Services Director Matthew Boko, Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Acting Director Lance Johnson, and Innovation and Communication Manager Ryan Agnes. We're happy to take all your comments and questions.
Before I move on to questions from my colleagues on council, City Manager Tripp, do you have any comments?
We are extremely fortunate to be the recipients of this federal stimulus money. Between this and the funds that we received a year ago, we've been able to continue with the balanced budget. The funds a year ago and your quick actions to freeze our hiring and to reduce costs in the organization has put us at a point right now where we have the deepest reserves and we're really in great shape financially. So from an operating standpoint, we feel terrific moving ahead, but the biggest problem for the city, frankly, are investment in the sorts of things that have long-term benefit, and that is infrastructure. Many of us were adamant about using these funds in a way that would continue to pay and make an investment that continued to make investment back in our community for many years to come. There's many things that could have been done. I have colleagues in other cities that are doing projects that are one-time special projects that I'm sure are going to be a benefit to their community, and we could have certainly brought forward to you many of those. But I think what we have here today is a very responsible, conservative approach of using these one-time funds to invest in our community that will have benefit. I particularly think the investments in water conservation, long-term water utility are remarkable. I think they're going to set a standard in the Front Range for how to handle water moving forward and how important water conservation is to us. And, they're going to provide some visible evidence of what changes in landscape can look like. So I'm really proud of this, but this is ultimately your decision. If you have other thoughts and ideas, we're here to listen tonight. We feel very strong about the recommendation we provided to you today. You may want to move the money around a bit. Maybe there's something you'd like to see a little more money in. We're here to listen and to answer your questions. And I just want to really thank Larry, Chris, Michael, the CFO team behind this, and of course the departments. And their Max and Lance and Matthew are here. Ryan's on the call for their very creative ideas as to how to meet the requirements of ARPA and at the same time provide long-term investment in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Are there any questions from my colleagues, comments, or thoughts that you'd like to share? Councillor Smith. Oh, I apologize. I think it's the wrong. Councillor Scully.
Thank you, ma'am. I was hoping one of my colleagues would go first because I'm still kind of formulating my questions in my head, but I'll give it a go. So I very much appreciate the work that the staff did on this. I know this was very hard. I know that all of us come to you with a lot of different wants and demands, and I appreciate that you listened to pretty much everything that we have said. And so thank you. Thank you for that work. I appreciate that half of the money is actually going to our water conservation. I think that's really important. I'm confused on how it doesn't, I know it can't reduce rates, but can it reduce how much we have to raise rates in the coming future. That's what I was really hoping for.
You know, there are a couple people who can answer this really well. I'll start with Max, if Max wants to take a shot at it. Larry, if he misses anything there in terms of the financial end of it, please jump in. You know, it's actually in a way rather simple in that this water treatment plant that we believe needs to be done by 2025. We'll have a second phase if we don't conserve water.
Okay.
And conserve water at a pace that's greater than what it's been. But, you know, Max, if you wouldn't please maybe add to that and whatever else you have to say.
Sure, there's probably a couple of examples we could add to that. The article that you were provided, which was written by our staff 7 years ago, details how conservation essentially equals cost avoidance. It's not purely about just saving water. It's every effort toward conservation to the whole is cost avoidance in one way or another. Mr. Tripp mentioned one example, a prominent example, and there's a reason why Water 2025 is divided into two phases. The first phase, which is the immediate construction of 30 million gallons of treatment, is necessary today. We deliberately placed that second phase of construction into the 2030s decade so that we have ample opportunity, number one, to get maximum benefit out of the Semper water treatment facility through the decade of the 30s, but also so that we would have that much more time to gauge and understand where we're headed as a community with conservation, with water demand management. And what Mr. Tripp was getting at is at this moment, we think that might be as much as a second 30 million gallon treatment train for that plant. If conservation continues to follow the path of success that it is, it's highly likely that we would need half or less of that amount. So a tremendous future cost avoidance. That's just one example, and there are others like it. Specifically, as this program would also be available and target residents and HOAs, there's an incredible amount of work that can be done with HOAs to change landscapes and maybe move away from the heavy emphasis on turf and move to more native plant materials and landscapes that will be most compatible with the future of water in Colorado. The other part of that, I hesitate to speak too much for PRL here, but the examples that you saw with just looking at parks alone, as well as the city hall landscape, the opportunities are incredible. And that work is actually already underway. PRL has changed some of the irrigation. There's a lot more to go to ensure that the areas that are most irrigated are the areas that kids and families play on, but other parts of parks can return to a more natural landscape. Those kinds of savings, which are directly translated to a cost for the city to otherwise irrigate, are represented in those kinds of cost savings. And what I say is avoidance. It's avoidance of future cost that this would bring. Does that help?
It does. It helps tremendously.
I'd like to ask Lance, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've done the last couple of years in particular? I mean, I think it's a bit of a secret because we're not, it's growing momentum and we're seeing more of it. But I think both with the golf course technology advancements and also just with the changes in our landscape program.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So you've already kind of prepped us previously. Back in November 2019, you approved a little over $1 million to allow us to install a new central irrigation control system in our park system. That's been fully implemented in all of our parks this year. We'll get to our right-of-ways and contracted areas next year. And then 2 or 3 months ago, you approved the financing for our irrigation systems to replace both systems at both golf courses. So with those systems, we're looking at long-term future. So the golf courses using the HDPE that we're going to put in the ground are systems that are last 30 to 40 years. So we take that technology and we move it over into parks. When Legacy Ridge's system is completed this spring, coming online, we're going to have 12 acres of turf that were being used with potable water. We're going to be converted to reclaim, which is great. We'll be able to put it back on those on the reclaim system. So immediately with the Legacy Ridge at the golf courses, 12 acres of turf going from potable to reclaimed. And that numbers comes out to, we talked about 1.5 acres of water, acre feet of water we save per acre. So there's 18 acre feet of potable water each year we save just by converting Windsor Park and Foxshire Park to reclaimed water. That's a big benefit and a cost savings to us. So we take those types of things and take them into the park system. Obviously much smaller systems, but they need to be, all of our parks need to be renovated. All 63 parks need new irrigation systems. Probably the newest we have would be Westfield Village, which would be 12 to 13 years old. So you take soccer center, the circle, or the city park, the soccer circle. We constructed that back in 1995. So it's 26 years old. So just a little less younger than the golf courses themselves. So we've got systems like that are even older, 30, 40 years. So you take the technology of combining the fact that we have taps in all of our parks that are maybe a 3/4 inch or 1 inch or a 2 inch or a 4 inch tap. And you have that tap and the pressure with those systems throughout the city varies. You take a park that may have 5 acres of turf, and you take the tap size and the pressure in that area, you probably should only be watering 3 acres of turf efficiently. Right now, we can't water that amount of turf with the systems we had. They're so ancient and it just doesn't work that way. So if we take the tap size we have and the pressures we have, work with what we have, downsize the amount of turf we have in each of those parks, convert some of those areas to xeric, some of them to natural grasses, and then take that 5 acres of park and maybe it's 3 acres of turf that we're watering now. So we're saving water that way by reducing turf. We're watering more efficiently with a newer system. It's a win-win both all the way around. And that's what the goal would be for every park that we do, that we take and we convert to a new system as we move forward. So,
maybe an exclamation point to all of that. And for people that are listening, 37% of the land area in our city is parks and open space. Most of that's us. So guess what? We're the #1 water customer. We can have the greatest impact on water in our city in the way of conservation just by our own practices. And so we're investing in that in ourselves. And then we're going to be helping, as Max mentioned, the HOAs and individual property owners bridge that gap. This has been a city that's encouraged a lot of green Kentucky bluegrass turf. It's required in a lot of our planning and zoning guidelines. And we just can't be a sustainable city and do that moving into the future. Some of that is appropriate, and it's something that I think we can be proud of in our city, but it's not a balance. It's not a balance. It's time to make a change. And we have this shot in the arm with this one-time amount of money that we can really move ahead very quickly versus what we'd be able to do within the utility system or even the general fund. And thank you.
Can I ask a question about that? You said 37% parks and open space. I did see that on the graph I think it was last week. Does that include golf courses?
I don't think it includes the actual acreage of the golf courses, no. And that would be basically the golf courses have 90 acres of turf at both golf courses, so 180 acres of turf. And then we've got approximately 250 acres of native grasses, native area around the golf courses.
So the actual green space in our city is actually greater than 37%.
You take that.
That's certainly the fact, because we're talking about public area. There's an awful lot of private, you have the Ranch Country Club, for instance, and those kinds of properties too. So you can get your number on that if you want. But the reality of it is a large part. If Max wants to report what those numbers are, he can sure do that here this evening. But I'll tell you, it's a big part of our, a lot of our water in the city is being thrown up in the air, and it's being used to water plants that are not indigenous to this region.
It's trees, specifically some trees, right?
Well, trees, but the real user is Kentucky bluegrass, turfgrass, and other cool weather grasses that work pretty well in the upper Midwest, but not really well in this climate.
Okay.
They're pretty, great to look at.
Yeah.
And it's not just lawns. It's acres of land that are in HOAs, many corners across the city that you can see that are flood detention areas that are landscaped in a way that it just is not sustainable.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
So I had another question on the street improvements. Can we go to that slide? All right, so we said Sheridan Boulevard from 92nd to 96th. It was my understanding that Sheridan Boulevard is a CDOT street, belongs to the state, not to us. Are we repairing Sheridan or are we repairing something else along there?
Sheridan is a mixed responsibility. We have maintenance responsibility on Sheridan from about 86th, 88th, 86th place, I think it is, up to 120th. So towards the, recently within the past few years, you saw a large mill and overlay up around Coles area, closer to 120th. That was all our project. It's all our responsibility from about the bridge over 36th or 88th, let's say, up to 120th. So that's an example. That little piece is a missing piece that has not been paved and is in terrible condition. But these three are just examples. All we did was pull out some prominent examples of where this money could specifically go that would have the greatest bang for the buck to our motoring residents. There would be many more within that total of $4 million spread over those 3 years. And I appreciate that it was spread out because you can only spend it so fast. Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect example why that money was spread out over 3 years to enable us to actually smartly execute it.
I appreciate you bringing to light that there are actually other projects, that these were just some of the bigger ones to highlight.
Long list.
Long list.
There's a long list. As we've shown you, as our street operations manager presented to you in May, we are spending about 50% of what we should be spending just to arrest the decline of our pavement quality index. And that gap is approximately $5 million a year gap from what we spend right now to what we ought to spend to stop the decline of that pavement quality index. So this goes a long way to help that for a period of time. If those $4 million are applied this way.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Counselor Scully, it sounds like it might be light.
Unmuted. Okay. I'm going to propose a recess as we do a quick IT diagnostic.
Muted.
Not that I can see.
Does
No, I don't
someone
think
want
there's
to
a,
test it?
there's not a control.
What do you think? Is it working now?
Can you hear me okay on this mic?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's clear, no feedback.
Oh,
Don't touch it.
You're
Don't
gonna have
touch
to
it.
stand there all night. That's.
All right.
did I
We're going to
continue?
restart the study session. Counselor Scully, will you continue with your questions?
Thank you, ma'am. So I do appreciate that we looked at this from a different lens. That we looked at this spending not as one-offs, but as long-term. How can we help in the sustainability of our community in the long term? I think that's wise investment. So I appreciate that, and I especially appreciate that we included money going to our Human Services Board, because I think that's a way to really reach out to food pantries and to housing and to some of our local services, mental health, things that will definitely need assistance. So I really do like this. When we go to publish, if this gets approved, if and when it gets approved, I would like to make sure, one, that we're very transparent and that we show on our website somewhere where we are spending the money and how we are spending the money so that residents can see that. And two, I would like us to address how it serves all the different populations of our community. Because I think sometimes there is people don't understand or maybe misunderstand that when we say we're working on water conservation, how does that help the whole community? Everyone who lives here is affected by water conservation. Everyone who lives here is using those roads. If you're a walker, a biker, or a driver, you are using those roads in some way. Everyone is affected by our fleet, driving on our roads and how they drive on our roads. The technology, I mean, we have sat in these meetings and had meetings that we couldn't get on because we had to wait for technology. We all know technology is an important part. And then Human Services Board specifically, how does that outreach to those who are underserved, underrepresented, in maybe more dire need than others? So I just want to make sure that we are transparent and we are communicating that information out in some way. That is my only comment for that. So thank you for the report tonight. I thought it was very well done. I will be a yes on this, but my colleagues have their say too. So,
Counselor Smith.
Thank you. And thank you for going through each of these and defining what they mean in its entirety. I think it's important to understand that reading it from just a council report only gets one side of the information. So I appreciate the presentation. As I was reading the report, and I'm just going to read off some questions I had going through it originally. And I've lent, the presentation has developed more questions for me. So I'm going to read them in its entirety and then formulate answers from there as far as answering them. So when I was reading through each of these items, the water conservation, the streets, the public safety, I'm looking to maybe pick and choose and cherry pick from these, but I can't support all of them in its entirety. Because when I was reading through them, my initial thoughts are consistently, we've had public comment about replacing the irrigation in historic Westminster, whether that be the irrigation and or landscaping in the area to help the betterment of the area. So that is a concern as far as the water conservation goes. I know that that is a line item in the presentation where it said that there's irrigation planned. I would want to see where, and I believe it listed in the presentation the items that it said where, but it didn't say anywhere in historic Westminster, which we've consistently heard from our constituents in that area. The other one is, what about our streets needing repair? We just went through a presentation to council where 20% of residents only agreed that they approve our roadways, that they need repair. And we are already in a shortfall with repairing our roadways. So I'd like to see more dollars go into repairing our streets. And this kind of lends to Councilor Scully's question about indirectly, can this help reduce water rates over time? Maybe not a whole lot, but can we move the needle on making that reduction in water rates? The rehabbing of our municipal court, that has been on our list for as long as I can remember. And I think that we need to make sure that we're not only taking care of the facilities that we have, which we're listed in our public safety facilities, but we need to look at our greater capital improvement projects that are really in dire need of improvement, such as our municipal court, as well as possibly the MAC. What other facility buildings that we need to have eyes on that need that repair? And then I'm not necessarily a proponent in providing tax dollars to businesses to generate them coming to Westminster. However, it can be a source of revenue for us. And so can we maybe use our dollars in an economic development way to help fill some of our retail areas that need filled, maybe with small businesses, maybe enticing them for a larger revenue cost long-term, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, probably 20. And so those are a couple of the questions that I've come up with just reading through the packet. The others that I'd like to ask from the presentation are, it sounds like the water conservation program would be a new program for us. Is that an accurate statement? So it's things that we're already focused on as a city.
The items that are envisioned here are programs that already exist. If you look at the level of funding that we had proposed for 2022, you may recall there was an aggregated amount of $250,000 toward water conservation programs. We're not spending that at that level in 21. So 22 would have been an increase over where we were. You know, every year it seems we have put more money toward conservation, but this would go significantly beyond that and require a little bit different approach than what we've done now if we want to have more HOA participation, more resident participation, voluntary participation. So same general programs, just at a different scale.
Great, thank you for that clarification. It read to me that it was new programming, so thank you for the clarification. For what we're adding these dollars to, would it require any extra staff to execute these programs, to execute the continuing cycle of these programs?
I can't speak to everything across the board, but it would probably, for streets, for example, it would require some additional contract preparation and contract inspection. We'd want to provide the same level of service that we provide today. We would be far stretched. So we would need some temporary help to perform functions like that. In the water conservation area, essentially we have less than 1 FTE devoted to this area of conservation. Less than 1 FTE could not execute a program of this size. So we'll have to leverage consultant partnerships as well as probably take on some temporary staff depending on how successful these programs are. We'd scale it to the size of participation.
Okay, so we feel confident then, particularly with the water conservation program, if we allocated 7.5 million to the program, we have enough staff and labor that we can make it happen.
For the amounts that you see here, I'm saying no. Additional staff either through partnerships with consultants or temporary staff or some other arrangement. There will be more labor involved to execute programs of this size.
Okay.
As I said, we have a fraction of 1 FTE devoted to this program today.
Okay, got it. Thank you. As we look at the next item of technological investment for council chambers, some questions came to mind is what software will it take? Is it compatible with what we already have? And would we be able with a new software be able to make it ADA compliant? Because as far as I understand, YouTube, our live stream makes it ADA compliant with the text below. So with this new technology that we're going to implement or proposing to implement, would our software make those, would it talk to the systems that we already have in place?
Everything we build and buy will work together. It has to. The investment is to invest in technology. Push the wrong button. Thank you. The investment we're making is into the technology and infrastructure that will allow us to provide certainty on a regular basis for televised meetings. We haven't been doing that previously. We've actually struggled in the last year to provide what many cities around us have provided it for years. And the difference between us and them is that many of those cities have made this investment in this technology in their council chambers. The most recent example is Thornton, and it's reported to me that they spent approximately $1 million on their council chambers in order to upgrade to this level. But the question of ADA access and compatibility, that's a requirement in federal law today that we do that and that we make it compatible. And what I found is that one of the great limitations we have to meeting those requirements of ADA is not having the upgraded technology. So I would have to say this will advance that, but you can be certain whatever we buy will be compatible with other systems that we have in play today.
Okay, thank you. So while I know that it was explained that we need to jumpstart these programs and look more into what we have, I think that it's a greater respect and a greater due diligence that we use these dollars to maintain and jumpstart what we already have in place, meaning the streets that need repair that we've heard in our resident surveys. So I can't fully support what's presented here in our council packets. I'm willing to hear more. Maybe we can allocate dollars in a different way, but I'd like to see more dollars go to our streets and then more of an emphasis in maintaining our facilities, especially with the repair of our municipal court. So thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Demont, or I'm sorry, Councilor, hold on. Everything's out of order. I just realized. Councilor Voles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, Mayor Pro Tem. I have a few questions and a few comments, and they're going to be kind of random because I'm looking at this and I kind of took notes. And I'm going to go jump around a little bit. But first of all, I want to say I strongly and wholeheartedly support the Human Services Board increase. I think that's a fantastic idea. They did 100,000 additional last year. They do 100 or roughly 130 every year. Because of COVID and COVID relief and the tremendous need, they did an additional 100,000, and they did a really good job. And they were very excited. The community was very excited. So I think the return on investment there is tremendous. So I strongly support that, and I'm very glad to see that in there. So I will say I do support that strongly. Let me I guess I want to be jumping around, so I apologize. My notes are kind of hodgepodge here. So we're talking about roads. Are bridges also included in this as well, Max? You know, we hear a lot about bridges and the age of bridges, and so is this part of the system along with our road improvements?
We have very minimal responsibility for bridges in our city. You might be thinking of, say, bridges over I-25, over US 36, that kind of thing. Our responsibility for those bridges is very limited. And where you see us spend money is essentially on the architectural enhancements to those bridges, where we do corrosion control and painting. Beyond that, we have few bridges that we have responsibility for. So really, it's primarily a CDOT responsibility within our area.
Good, thank you, appreciate that. My next question, I guess, is more about the city fleet electrification. And I don't know the slide, you probably mentioned this. What percent of our fleet, after this $900,000 investment over 3 years, how much or what percentage of our fleet would be electric, roughly? And it probably is in there, I apologize, I'm taking notes.
Good evening, thank you, Councilor Bowles. So our fleet is about 600 pieces of equipment.
Okay.
And of those, what we'd be looking at electrifying are more of your light duty fleet, because that's right now where the most offerings are in the electric vehicle offerings. So right now in our sedans and our hybrid, we have about 60 vehicles. So if we look at that grouping of vehicles and we can convert up to 20 of those over to electric, that will be a significant amount of that section of our fleet. And as other things come on, as far as trucks, medium duty vehicles, we can look at that. So it'll be a good head start.
Good, okay, and I support that. I think the long-term investment, we do get savings over time. So I do support the overall concept. I'm just curious.
Okay.
Why are we in the first year, we're investing 100,000, then the next year jumps to 400,000, the next year 400,000? Why is it, I'm just curious, why is that amount in the first year?
So we're looking at getting our charging infrastructure in place. That's been our biggest barrier to getting our fleet electrified, is having our charging infrastructure. So we'll be looking at investing in that, getting that groundwork laid, and then bringing the vehicles on.
Oh, good, okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions I had for that.
Thank you, Councilor.
I learned something tonight, so
Okay.
thank you.
So-
And then to the water conservation, you know, I just want to make a comment. As we add more natural areas, a lot of our residents see that and they don't understand kind of that process, that it's going to natural area. They think we're not maintaining it. And I know in the 4th of July, I heard that from a number of residents, and I kind of raised that point. I think one thing we might want to do, and I don't know if there's a potential for some signage or some education, communication, that that's the way we're headed. It's for conservation, it's natural areas. I don't think they will realize that at times. And that there's a process, meaning it, for those native plants to take hold, it takes a few years of working on that, maintaining that. Do we have a plan for kind of educating? I haven't seen it yet as much. I think it would be helpful.
Correct. No, you're exactly right. We do have a plan where once we have our new PRL, communication and outreach person embedded in PRL, we're going to start working on this type of communication. So that it's going to go a long ways. And hopefully sometime this fall, we'll start that push about natural grasses in Zurich and start getting that word out. Signage, the city manager Trips talked about a lot of signage, and we'll be doing signage also. So yeah, we'll have quite a bit of communication going out starting this year as we push that forward.
Good. That's good news. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then on the working with HOAs, we've talked about that several times in the last year or so, and that's an important thing. And I think a lot of us really support that in water conservation. One of the problems they have is their ODP in a lot of these areas is locked in to Kentucky bluegrass turf. We're going to need to redo that. And I've talked to a few people, and they said that's $10,000 to $20,000 investment by that HOA to redo that whole process, which is money they probably don't have set aside for this. How would we work with them to help kind of smooth that out or make that easier process for HOAs who decide to zeroscape and cut back on? How can we make that an easier process for those HOAs than it is currently? Is there a plan in place, or are we looking at that?
I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody in the room know the answer, or do we have anybody that's on the call this evening? Please come in. I would venture to say that we're going to have to work, as you said, with that. This is an example of a program that we've done on individual bases, and we've negotiated a way to get through those where HOAs have approached us and wanted to make those changes. But we're talking about a more wholesale approach here, and I think you're raising a really good point. We're going to have to probably address the fees that are in there and the processes through community development, streamline that, and certainly not unnecessarily use money for fees that's actually helping our city. So good point. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear we're possibly going to begin working in that direction, because I'm hearing from a number of HOAs, and that's the roadblock is kind of more on our side. So, and then one last point, I guess I have a question. Targeted purchases of small parcels to dewater. Are these in holdings? I mean, I'm not sure I understand exactly what that is. So again, I'm going to learn something tonight, another something. So,
well, I don't think we can or probably should get into individual parcels tonight in that discussion. I can just tell you that.
No, but that's not really my question about individual parcels, but the dewatering, what does that mean? I'm not sure how that works. How do we
land
help?
that would otherwise potentially be used for additional development, make it open space so it was not developed. Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologize.
Yep. No, that's fine. Thank you. That's all I have for now. Thanks. Good report, and I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Bowles has added a lot of questions for me tonight. So, I will say, in large, first thing, start with the Human Services Board. I like that money there. I actually would like to see it more. I know that our nonprofits have been some of the groups that have suffered the most through this, because there's been less mechanisms for them to get operating funds that have went away. And the reason they went away is because they work largely off of donations, and most people haven't been in a situation that they've been able to or have been comfortable donating with such an uncertain situation that we've had going on with the pandemic. So if everybody would be open to it, I think, if you look at the bucket of money in a whole, it would be easy to double that money by taking a little bit of each bucket. And I would be in favor of something like that, but I am supportive of it in general. But if my colleagues were open to it, I would expand that number, just because I know how much our nonprofits are really hurting through this pandemic. But with that being said, so I want to dig into a couple of things that, first, going backwards on my list. On bridges specifically, the one that I wouldn't have even thought of this if the question wasn't asked tonight, but do we not have responsibility for the one that connects kind of between Thornton and Westminster and the Orchard? Wasn't that a governmental agreement that whole area is based on? Am I wrong in thinking that? And the only reason I ask is, if we are responsible for it, the question that came in my mind that might not be relevant to these dollars is, how are we planning ahead? Because it's a fairly new piece of infrastructure, but how are we planning ahead as a city to have to maintain that in the future?
Yeah, I'm sure Max has better information than I do. It was an intergovernmental, but the intergovernmental agreement that Max may not be as familiar with had to do with exchange of revenues from retail sales on both sides. The bridge is actually a responsibility of the DOT, but as he mentioned before, there may be architectural features that have to be maintained by the city.
I think you might be recalling that we've had various IGAs when we did the bridge, the bridges at 120th and 120th and 144th. But that was really just the architectural components of that bridge. And we do split those costs. At each of those bridges, there's a different participation level, but between Thornton, North Glen, Westminster, but it's only for those additive items. CDOT has responsibility for the bridge itself.
Okay,
right.
That's perfect. That was my question. I appreciate you jogging my memory on that. So with that being said, whatever we can do on streets, I think it's good. And I do agree with Councilor Smith as far as trying to figure out the areas where we've had the most complaint. And I would assume that would be kind of how we would approach it. I would like to I don't know if we did get these slides in an email. I know typically we will at some point. I don't remember seeing these, but it would be nice to be able to see them just so for notes for myself. But any more detail that we could get that really shows exactly where those dollars are going to go, I think is useful to me as I make a decision.
Could I interject, Chair
Sure.
Pro Tem?
Sure.
This is leading to a number of your comments. There is an extensive list of streets that will be use this money. And they're all streets that are in dire need of repair, that are behind schedule. And they're located throughout the city. I think that we can maybe take a little tension off this one by getting you a list, that full list of streets citywide that are going to be eligible for the use of this money. Now, keep in mind, that full list that we have is probably a decimal point more than what you're looking at here, at least. But those are all going to be streets, and they're citywide in all segments of the city, and it's extensive. But we will get that for you tomorrow, so you've got that. And these three are very highly visible streets that we get a lot of complaints about, and I think that's why they were selected. But there certainly are others.
No, that makes total sense. You only can fit so many on a slide, so I appreciate seeing the full list. On the cars, as far as the electric cars, and I understand the size of them, but maybe you could just, I think it helps me as well as I think it helps the public understanding practically, like who's driving those cars. Were they code enforcement cars? I know we have some electric inside our police department. What kind of cars will we be replacing with this portion of the fleet?
So these would be mainly administrative vehicles, which would be anywhere from community development to public works. To say that sedan fleet and hybrid fleet are our most likely candidates for that. Our police fleet is a separate conversation. Right now, we're traditionally gassed units there. We will be looking at bringing the hybrid technology. We've already started that process there. And as electric vehicles come into that space that meet the requirements of our PD, we would look at that. But these are primarily administrative vehicles at this point.
Let me clarify the administrative. We're talking about surveyors, inspectors, animal control officers, in addition to some field supervisors.
Yep.
But when we say administrative, we're talking about non-public safety and non-heavy equipment.
Correct. Thanks, Don.
That makes sense. I'm glad to hear you earlier comments talk about looking ahead. I know, for example, I saw that Ford looks like they're coming out with the electric version of their F-150. I'm waiting for Chevy to get on board. But
There you go.
so that is all the questions on the fleet I have. I don't have any other questions. I'm glad to see us continuing to, well, actually, I do have one other question.
Okay.
So when you do the charging stations, how do we as a city look at, or can we, or are there opportunities that as we bring those online, understanding there's more electricity we're consuming, how do we look at finding ways to know that that's green energy opposed to, I know Excel, that's kind of upstream, but I just want to know like how it's actually impacting us, because if I plug my car in, but it's not coming from a clean source, am I really doing any good? And I want to make sure wherever there's opportunities that's the area that we're driving to and that people understand. And I know that Paul Smeekins put a lot of time into this, so I think it's an opportunity to share what we're doing in that realm.
A lot of our electricity does come from solar gardens right now, Mayor Pro Tem DeMott. So I can get you some more information as we look at deploying those stations. We can provide you that information.
Right, that would be great. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And I don't have any more questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So on the water piece, that's the last thing. I have a handful of questions on that. I understand if I understand the summary that was given, this is really about preventing down the road cost increases more than anything, which makes sense to me. And I know that that's something that we have to do. I know that, we're all trying to figure out how we address where we're at today, but, down the road is equally as important to all of us, I think. But through some of your answers, I had some additional questions. So like when you're talking about the 2025 in that it is 30 million, potentially an additional 30 million in a second phase that we wouldn't have to have, how does that capacity measure up to where we're at today?
Yeah, Max, if you'd come up and answer that. And while you're coming up, I'll give you something else to maybe mention. There certainly is the 2025, but I want to have you go back to, and maybe even Michael, there's cost avoidance that's immediate. The investments that we're going to be making here are general fund and utility fund investments that are going to be every year. So there is an avoidance to future utility capital costs, but there's a big avoidance of O&M and even the cost that we have today to buy water. You know, the city is a water customer, and we pay for potable water, and we pay a lot for our non-potable reclaimed sources, and so that's going to be a direct savings to the taxpayer. But Max, if you would maybe cover both of those a little bit. Michael, if you have anything to add from one of the slides previous, we could do that also.
The water 2025 example I used, right now we have 59 million gallons of rated capability to produce water a day. 44 million gallons of that is at Semper, 15 million gallons of that is at Northwest. Northwest remains a constant throughout this period, and probably for another 40 years, it should remain constant for us. So what we're really talking about is how do we replace and to what extent do we replace Semper? For sure, we know we're very solid on the 30 million gallons required now. Why this makes sense for us to phase it the way we did is let's see how things go, and that will guide us in those design decisions about just how much more do we need beyond this 30 million gallons we'll build in the phase one. I think we could all be hopeful if you kind of recall those slides, that a slide that we have shown previously that has shown as population increases, our total water consumption actually has decreased, interestingly. If we can stay on trend lines like that, and programs like these would be a tremendous help. If we can stay on a trend line like that, it will have a significant impact in what we do in that phase two of the plant. That's one example. I'm not sure, Lance, are there others? Thinking more immediately, I think, okay.
Yeah. So just to speak to what was said about more immediate cost savings, especially for taxpayers rather than just ratepayers. I believe on slide 9 talked about just an example of doing some math of if 20% of P&L turf was replaced, you'd save 40 million gallons and about $300,000 each year. Direct cost to the city for paying for that water.
And that's, I think that's it for that portion. I have some other questions around the programs with parks and stuff. Thank you, Max. So when we talk about some of those programs as far as the buyback, and I'm glad that Councilor Vols really hit on the HOAs, because I know that's been a consistent thing that, really where there's potentially an opportunity, and I say that because, I've talked to a couple residents who have had landscapers come out and look at like their lots and say, here's what it would cost to xeriscape your yard. And some of them where they were told the ROI on it isn't there. So they have to make a choice. And this is just what I was told. I haven't, went down that route myself as far as, ripping out turf, but, and what potentially they had planned. But I think that that's the balance that a resident has to have, as well as we as a city has to have. Is there an ROI money wise versus, how much water we're saving? And so I don't know that, but some ideas that I just want to throw out there, because I know the idea of people pulling turf out, some people love that. And I think it's been a successful program that I certainly know the mayor has championed that program. But some people are hesitant because, you move into a home and say, this is my forever home. I want to raise my kids here. I want that lawn. And some people don't. So like one potential idea that was floated to me, and I just want to throw it out because I thought it was a neat concept. And I don't know with these kind of programs, what we might be able to do versus like a turf buyback. And again, this is just spitballing an idea that somebody gave me. So if you were to replace, say, the front yard with artificial turf, a lot of the new artificial turf looks very realistic, like grass, but it's an investment that costs. Is there any way the city could use one of these types of programs, like the buyback one, where you would allow somebody to, say, replace their front lawn over a certain amount of time, and say, tack it onto their utility bill as almost a loan, because we would be able to conserve the water. They would be able to help us maintain that green look in their yard and potentially keep the backyard for their dogs or whatever. And that's an idea a resident put out to me. And I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't sound a whole lot different than our turf buyback program. It's just a different way to accommodate the same need, which is lowering their water rate overall, as well as conserving. So you don't have to answer that today, but is there room in this to be able to look at those kind of dollars that we're allocating for these kind of conservation programs for our customers to maybe not be set in stone, so we could look at some different opportunities such as that? Does that make sense where I'm going with that?
It does. And, I think we'd be foolish to not listen to what the customer wants and to see whether there's something that will be appealing and motivate them to make the changes we need them to make. It's a little complicated. I mean, there are other factors with artificial products that are out there today, including the heat they create in the neighborhood, which is substantial, by the way. If you've had a child that's played in youth sports programs and you've gone to those fields, you know what that's like. And it can be that way in the neighborhood. But I do think that our motivation here is to help convince people that we should all do something together to reduce the amount of water we're using on turf. And if they've got an alternative sort of a use they want to make, and they want to mix it with turf, as we've said before, we're not talking about eliminating turf in our community. We've got to have turf grass in our parks, in those spaces where people play, in order to maintain it. So it's a balance. I just think we're out of balance one way right now. If you look at the acres and acres, particularly in HOAs, that literally is storm detention area. It's Kentucky bluegrass that's being watered every day. It just doesn't, it seems like there's an alternative, but no, there's room in here for us to listen to those ideas.
Agreed. Well said. And just kind of speaking a little bit on community development's behalf, since they're not present in the audience, but I think the stage is being set for that as we speak. There is a demonstration project underway right now, looking at an installation of artificial turf, developing a specification for it that could be widely used by residents. And it's doing things like Don said, taking daily temperature measurements, et cetera, to see how is it performing? How does it function? What does it take to do one well so that it's not garbage in 2 years? Those kinds of things. But I think the stage is being set as we speak for it. And I know of a few very specific cases where HOAs have already condoned it and approved it for backyard use within fences. So the momentum is starting to develop.
That's great. I think along those same lines, and this might be more into the park stuff and the changes at City Hall. I think City Manager Tripp, you hit it on the head as far as we need to listen to our residents. And so I'm curious, as we decide areas for the more natural grass in the parks and rec, how are we taking input from residents? Because I'll tell you, it certainly is a love-hate relationship that the residents have with those changes. I hear some that give high praise and some who don't like it, and it's usually just because of a particular area that maybe they used to frequent that now it's that natural grass. So I'm curious on how we take input and decide how that's going to be changed so it's still functional for the residents. As far as that. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, because before I was on council, I had the opportunity to come and advocate. You actually, I don't remember if you were the city manager yet or if you were still Parks and Rec, but I was asked as somebody who was a community leader in Countryside to speak on behalf of that change to the natural grass in the Totem Pole Park Countryside Lake area. And I will tell you, for the first couple of years, it looked atrocious, and I definitely got beat up for advocating it. But now you can't tell the difference. I think so. And I only bring it up because I think if you're going to give a good example, having some photos of that before and after, and hopefully you have some to put up, like this is what it can look like. I think that's a great opportunity. But with that, I would like to understand, like, if we're going to redo the front of City Hall, like, how is that going to still be usable, and how are we taking input and what that might be that's going to make people a little bit more excited about it?
So first, going to the parks question. So yes, we're going to have to have outreach to the neighborhoods, and obviously you're not going to be able to please everybody no matter what you're doing. I think if holistically as a city, if we're approaching it that what we're attempting to do is good for everyone in the city on the water conservation side, that's going to help the whole process. I think we just have to evaluate park by park what kind of use it has, what the neighborhood is thinking, take the majority of what people think is good and not good, and just combine that and how we revamp that park. Whether it's maybe some parks we take away less turf, other parks we may be able to take more turf. I mean, just a matter of, I think it's going to kind of go vary from park to park how we do that. So it's going to be that'll make things a little bit more involved when it comes to the communication, but it can be done. It's just a matter of we're going to have to be patient and just kind of get used to that. I think as we move forward, people start understanding better how we're trying to promote that. So when you move to City Hall, I think obviously, as City Manager Tripp said, I mean, this, for us to be the leader and show what you can be done, reducing turf, taking turf out, being more leader in water conservation, there's a multitude of things we can do out in this 3.2 acres out on the north side of City Hall. You could have tons of xeric. You could have a couple different areas for community gardens. You could have shade shelters. You could have outdoor classrooms. You could have all kinds of different things. You could even leave turf. You could have some small areas of turf. You could put some different types of drought tolerant turn and buffalo grass. I mean, we could do all kinds of different things. I think it's going to be an area that would be very diverse and allow for many different examples that you could show citizens, what they could actually do if they convert to xeric and remove that turf. So I think there's a lot of things. It's going to be a learning area, more or less an educational area, to promote what we want to do as far as water conservation goes.
Great. That's great information. I appreciate it. I guess just my last comments, and I am still wary and a bit skeptical about the 2025 project in general. For the most part, with the input that I'm sure that I've already heard here tonight, as well as whatever we hear, there's some great opportunity here. And in general, I think you have a good layout of what we could do with these dollars. So hopefully these conversations continue, and as we move forward to actually decide what we're going to do with it.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilor Seymour, or I'm sorry, yes, Councilor Seymour.
Number 6. Inside joke on the button. My colleagues had some great questions and comments, so I'm going to leave most of that to that. I don't want to nitpick on any one of these. I do believe that first line is a little out of balance. I do and would be in favor of us reallocating a bit more money to Human Services Board. Mayor Pro Tem DeMott put extremely well. If we're looking at this is COVID impact money, that's where the impact and our nonprofits really stepped up, and they're hurting. And so I a doubling there is, a few $100,000, not $1 million. And the impact, I think, would be really ingratiated to our community too. So I would be in favor of that. Just that's a minor thing. I think it's important, this money, is one-time expenses. So I think that's important, and that's what this looks like. If we can get a return of 1.5 acre feet, I believe, conversion over to potable water, that would be an incredible savings in our long-term water plan. Also, too, there's been some discussion about our capacity on potable water, and so that's something to talk about in the future, too, as far as do we need to expand that part of it, too, if we're going to be replacing that much. Not a need for a conversation tonight on that. But also the part with maybe reallocating a bit more to street improvements, because that is what we hear from the residents quite a bit, and we already know that our plan is behind. So, and that is, something that's functional that people look at every day. Thinking ahead though a little bit, it looks like the 1 gazillion infrastructure bill is going to go through. And so when we get to that money, federal dollars are going to change things too. Is that I think at that point too, we can look at potential expenses. And Councilor Smith, I completely agree with her. We have to do something about our municipal court. And so when we get to that point, I'll be rallying around that call also too, if that infrastructure money comes that direct way. And then if that is also true, a more complete and immediate relief of our water rates. And so we'll continue that discussion this evening too. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor Seymour. Councilor Vols?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just really briefly, I should have said this earlier. I want to thank our staff, our team here at City Hall being here tonight and helping us through this. So thank you for being here, guys and gals. And then I also want to voice my support for increasing and possibly doubling the amount going to the Human Services Board. It wouldn't be that much in the pot, but it would be a tremendous asset and a valuable amount of money spent on our human services, nonprofits and groups that help our citizens directly, especially during this time. So I support that as well. So thank you for mentioning that, both my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you to my colleagues. You asked some great questions. You gave some great input that I've actually, similar I think to some of you, influenced the questions I'm going to have next. I also want to say thank you to staff. I think sometimes it's almost easier to cut than it is to try to allocate with unexpected dollars and figure out how to prioritize. So I'm sure there was a lot of wish lists, a lot of worthy projects, and it was a difficult task to winnow that down to what's before us tonight. I would ask, I think Mayor Pro Tem has already asked this, but if we could please get a copy of the slideshow, all of council. I think it would be helpful for us. We're going to be having to communicate this with our broader public. It's a huge amount of responsibility to be accountable for a $14.5 million spending, to-do list. And so I'd like to be very able to articulate what we're doing and why. I also think that responsibility needs to go beyond council. And clear, concise communication of how we utilize ARPA dollars, specifically talking about cost avoidance, return on investment, how it benefits the taxpayers and how it benefits recovery. The intended uses of these dollars, I think we're going to want to have some infographics, some very quick things that this should be a source of community pride, that this is everybody coming together using their tax dollars to support our community. I want to kind of pick up on something that both Councilor Smith, I think most people mentioned. We just had a very compelling presentation from our streets division about how underfunded that program is, and just to kind of arrest the decline of the conditions of our streets. We're not even hitting that target number. My question, and this is a real question, my presumption is this is going to help, right? This is not a small amount of money. $4 million is real money. But is it perhaps allocated a little more lightly, because we do have $260 that will be coming to assist us with that, and potentially that infrastructure bill that Councilor Seymour just mentioned. And so we will have additional sources to assist us with that.
So thank you for the question. First off, I think everything that's in the recommendation is a balance of all the opportunities. So certainly we could swing things one way or the other depending upon council's preferences. Our approach with the needs to streets over the next couple of years is going to be taking it chunk by chunk. So earlier this year, we talked to you about the infrastructure fee. And with the proposed budget, we're going to bring back a proposal around the infrastructure fee that would help dig into part of this. This money through ARPA would dig into a bit of that gap. Money from the state, more so, maybe federal infrastructure dollars as well. and maybe continued changes to the infrastructure fee over the next couple of years to begin to dig into that gap and decrease the gap every year. But this is going to be a little bit of a piecemeal approach to address that because it's so large, right? $5 million a year. We could piece $15 million out just on that for 3 years, and we will have filled the gap for 3 years and then continue to have that gap. So this is a balance of the long-term benefit to the community and absolutely the short-term need in the streets.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. That there's not going to be a magic wand that comes in. This is going to be a long-term cobbling together to find a sustainable revenue source to it. I mean, that's the reality of it.
I'm afraid I don't have a money tree.
Okay, thank you. Let me know when you change that. So as we're talking about streets, I was going to ask these questions later, but I'll ask them now. While we're doing those projects from our typical general fund or from other dollars available from different grants, are we looking at concurrent improvements for our residents, really looking at a complete streets approach so that we're assisting with access, multi-mobility, all of the different things, the curb cuts so people who are in wheelchairs are able to get there. So we're really maximizing each dollar because we're hitting multiple goals of the city council as we're making these investments. Additionally, when talking about kind of a multiplier effect on these projects, there's a lot of different grant funding, whether it's from the state, the feds, partnerships that we can do with nonprofits or others that might help offset costs, maximize impact. So even I was really appreciated Mr. Johnson's conversation about education gardens to help perhaps scale up through education the impact of xeriscaping. There's a lot of, Colorado has an abundance of riches of knowledge in this space, from CSU to the Botanic Gardens to just the Butterfly Pavilion. I guess my guess is to be as innovative and take that council kind of goal of looking for regional partnerships to maximize all of the impact on this. And I know this goes slightly out of the scope of how to spend these dollars, but I do want that to be kind of the lens that we're looking at this for. How do we maximize the impact? I know we talked about fleet, ways for residents. I was wondering, as we look at that, and I am supportive of us doing fleet, and I'll be curious to see if the total cost per mile, if it's realized as we're predicting, and I'm hopeful it is. It might be more as we do have solar, and we might end up using those as little batteries. But I'm curious if there's ways, again, to maximize the impact of that, perhaps allowing residents to participate in bulk purchasing. I know other communities have done that. So as they're purchasing their fleet, they allow residents to get in and get lower pricing. And you multiply that. Or looking at group purchasing with other municipalities or government entities. Every way that we could maybe look to, again, increase this impact. I have just DeMott written on here for some reason. That's one of my questions. Please answer that. Oh, in regards to Human Service Board, I do agree that I think even a modest increase in the Human Service Board would have an outpaced impact. I don't know if that needs to come from the ARPA dollars, if it's something we want to look to at our general fund in addition. It's, since we're paying ourselves back in arrear, I guess it's kind of the same thing. But I would be supportive of looking at additional Human Service Board dollars. I have to confess something. When I was first looking at this, I was a little concerned that we didn't address more of the age and condition within our utility system. And so I thought this might offset some of those capital investments that we know already exist, part of our current CIP. And I was, prior to the presentation and understanding really the immense impact of conservation on the whole system, on what we have to engineer to. I think I missed it. But I would like to understand, if you're willing or prepared to answer that, kind of how the evaluation was made between existing age and condition issues and conservation as where to invest our utility, the utility dollars. Does that make sense? Am I clear?
So thank you for the question. And I'll give you a little insight into the decision-making process. So one of the first drafts of this sheet included the Lowell water main replacement project and a fairly substantial investment in assisting the utility fund with a major capital project. And staff took a step back and said, yes, we can make a one-time $1-to-1 dollar investment in the utility that will impact 1 year with just that set of dollars and have no further impact beyond that. Or we can take these funds and multiply the effect of them by doing something that's really not been done in the Colorado Front Range, by investing in a conservation program as large as what we're proposing. And I think it's really critical to understand it's not just those long-term capital savings, and we're going to keep trying to impress this upon you. The general fund has a very large irrigation bill, right, for parks, for City Hall, for other facilities. The cost of chemicals and energy bills at our water treatment plants are substantial investments. And these are things that today could be affected by using less water. And that's going to provide a return every year moving forward if we can conserve. So we absolutely, I want to make it 100% clear. We absolutely looked at doing a capital investment and assisting the utility fund. But staff believes we can multiply the effect of these dollars, really get back to the intent of those, and really help reduce cost for both the utility and the fund for our residents and businesses over the long run. That means that we can invest more in the general fund, right? Savings on irrigation are other things than we could do, like the increasing human services board is one example, but there's so many things that we're doing in the general fund. So I really think, and we all believe, this is a much better investment, a much better long-term investment than just doing a capital project for the utility.
I think it's fair to say, since probably about 2017, I've been involved in a lot of water conversations. It's been a big topic in the community. And I think the approach you're taking is sound and makes sense to me. But if I had a little knee-jerk reaction, why aren't we just investing in this deferred maintenance that we have talked about for the last 2 years? I think there's going to be a gap of immediate recognition of how this long-term and perpetually lowers the cost, this cost avoidance. And so I cannot highlight enough how we need to be clear in our communication of that this isn't moralizing, that this is really about cost containment to the entire system. So really just want to hammer that in.
I understand, and I think this makes it clear to me how we need to communicate this differently to our public. I'm disappointed we don't quite have signage and other items ready for you tonight. But one of the things that staff has worked on drafting is some signage to say, this area saved this many gallons with a conversion, which is this many dollars annually. Things like that can begin to communicate that investment back to the public.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate everyone's work the clarity of your communication and your report. And I look forward to getting the slideshow and also the list of the streets. I think that will also help alleviate maybe community concerns if we get reached out to and people say, hey, there's only 3 areas not near my home. Having that more comprehensive list, we can point to the fact that it's throughout our entire city. But thank you very much. City Manager Tripp, are you seeking some direction from council tonight?
We've had a lot of great direction. Thank you. I don't think anything beyond what I've heard already. If anybody wants to add anything, we want to get to unanimous support for this. This is an important step to be taking here with one-time dollars. I think I'll just reiterate, the staff was asked to spend this money in a way that continued to pay back to the city. The gift that keeps giving. That's what we said. That's why we didn't just go after individual capital projects, because one thing that we'll do after tonight is I'll provide you a number as to what if we took every dollar and spent it in one particular capital area, what would that really mean to tax rate or to water rate? Pretty insignificant, frankly. We do think that reducing water forever, by half the size of a water treatment plant is a pretty substantial long-term gift, as an example.
Mr. Lindsay.
So with council's feedback tonight, staff will come back with an appropriation ordinance to appropriate these dollars into capital budgets to allow these projects to begin on time and get this great work done. I think the feedback that I've heard that was fairly unanimous so far was a change to the Human Services Board item. If there's items beyond that that have consensus, we would absolutely like to take that feedback now as opposed to when there's an ordinance with an account table in front of you.
Councilor Smith.
Thank you. And I'd like to add in, I think I've heard maybe more than just me, and maybe allocating more dollars to streets, but I don't know.
I heard that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. I just didn't want that to get missed as far as maybe looking into increasing those dollars, but.
I think we can come back to you with numbers in all these areas that get closer to points that were raised, but clearly I heard more to streets also.
Okay. Thank you.
And I guess the caveat I would like is if we don't want to do more to streets, is it if we could see what we're expecting to get from 260 as our local share and how we're going to allocate that. I know that may not be fully calculated yet, but my understanding is there is maybe multiple revenue sources. So leaving this for ones that didn't, that I don't know. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There was one thing I realized that I didn't have on, and that was the technology update to chambers, council chambers. I think this is an important topic, and it's been shown to be more important over the last 18 months or so. And I had to give credit to former Mayor Pro Tem Garcia because he certainly was always a champion of why we're not televised. So with that being said, could you give me some just practical examples of how this increases our reach to our residents? Because I think that having some of those examples, exactly what that near $1 million, what that'll do for us actually reaching the community with these meetings.
Mayor Pro Tem, I think others would be much better at that. I'd like to get to our communications team. And that I'll just say very briefly, having reliable, guaranteed, ongoing telecasting of our meeting would be a change, a major change. 18 months ago, we weren't going to do that. And I believe now we need to. I mean, we set a standard and people responded to it. They have more ways to interact with us than ever. And they appreciate it. There's one problem. The technology is not there supporting it. As long as we continue to have meetings where we're waiting 20 to 30 minutes, we've got to do something to fix that. And I'm hoping that I'm counting on that, doing this. But, we'll try to quantify that and really lay out what the future of access to information and technology through technology in public meetings really means for the individual person, including reporting back on things such as Channel 8 and the way we're looking at Channel 8.
That'd be great. And I just think that as long as we have it as we go through this before we vote, if we can have some of those tangible examples for us to be able to share with the community, I would appreciate it.
Do that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments, or clarifications? Okay. I think you have your direction.
Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Before we go to the next item, would my colleagues like to take a brief recess? Okay. We will be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Parlow. Thank you, Mr. Lindsay, and everyone who worked on this.
I found that sign.
The one from Stanley Lake.
July reconciliation. That's good.
For the finance team. I'm not gonna say anything.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. The next item on our special study session tonight is going to be a discussion, a verbal presentation to City Council and to provide feedback to staff on proposed 2022 water rates. City Manager Tripp, would you like to lead us off on this discussion?
I would. Thank you. I'm going to have just some brief comments, and I'm going to have some help here from Larry with a very short presentation. And then other staff here, obviously, Max and Public Works Utility staff, and Chris and his team to assist. Let me just say first off, what I hope to get tonight, what I need to get tonight, is some direction in setting a water rate for 2020. We've got to get back in front of you as a part of the budget approval process with a rate, and the rate is going to be, driven by the direction you provide for us, and that rate drives the budget. So I really need to kind of bring this to some idea tonight before we leave. I want to just give you a really high level, background here after years of research and work, months of intensive conversation. It all kind of boils down to this. There's really, outside of ARPA and revenue sources that come along occasionally, there's really one source of revenue that runs our water and sewer utility. It's the revenue that comes from our ratepayers, from our customers. So that revenue comes in from one source, and I'd like you to think about it in this way, maybe saying it a little differently than we have in the past, is that there's really three buckets that revenue's got to go into in order to meet the needs of providing safe, reliable water to our customers. It needs to pay for the operation of the system, the treatment of water, the distribution of water to homes, the repair of related facilities, and so that when you turn that tap on, you've got water, and you've got clean water, and you've got water for all the purposes you need in your life. So that's number one. Number two is that there are ongoing capital costs of running the utility. I won't go into what all of them are, but you understand. There are pumps and motors and water lines and water treatment plants and pump stations. Many different elements of a very complicated system that has an aging condition and needs to be replaced near that aging condition. Today, in this era, we have a third bucket. We have the need to replace our water treatment plant. Now, that's debatable amongst you. I don't think it should be. I understand how the concerns that you have about it, and it will be an ongoing conversation. We've got to figure out some way to get everybody on the same page as to the need to replace the plant and the need and time to replace the plant and the cost of it. We'll continue to work through that, but there are those three needs, at least in our opinion. I brought you earlier a 3.98% increase for 2022. That number was calculated to be enough to take care of all the needs in 2022 and in 2023 for covering those three buckets. And there will need to be rate increases moving forward in the future. They control them. Those increases today are actually substantially less than they were when we were talking about this a year ago. The staff went through the capital program and made $700 million worth of changes to get that number down to 3.98. We brought that number to you as the lowest cost possible to fund those three buckets. This continues to be our staff recommendation, has to be. We can't recommend to you that you do something that we don't believe meets the needs of the system, but we do understand that you've asked us for other options. So we're here tonight to talk about other options as to how to meet those needs. There were three questions that were asked, okay? I'm now gonna spend to, I'd like to move to the next slide. And then beyond that, please, to slide number 1. I'm gonna turn to Larry here because I think the way to speak to this tonight and to cue this up for you is to address the three questions you've asked. There are three really, really good questions that relate to this issue in a real broad way. And Larry, if I could have you, take us through that, and then I'll jump back in to conclude here in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Once again, Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. You had three questions a couple of weeks ago, and we needed to do some financial analysis to respond to those. So we are back before you tonight to show you what we might be able to do in the area of phased rates. Now, staff has historically recommended smooth rate increases or revenue increases so that they can be spread out over different generations of Westminster residents and water consumers. We do this by phasing construction cost implementation over periods of time so that those water revenue increases can be digested by water consumers. We issue bonds, we undertake loans that get paid back over time so that we can achieve that intergenerational equity. And so hence the 3.98%, we of course did many things along that path to get that to the lowest cost possible. And that would be an increase for 2022 and beyond. And then there would be rate increases in subsequent years. But on the next slide, I'll show you what some alternatives might mean and how those look going forward. So first, I'll just describe the first row that you see, and that's the what Mr. Tripp just described, is that water rate revenue would be increased for 22, for 23, and 24, so that those are smoothed over time. Now, you do see in some of the out years rates that are slightly higher. That's, as we get a little bit further into the future, we have some conservatism there, and we'll continue to reevaluate those as those years get closer on the horizon. But we did some hypothetical work here in the financial analysis to say, what if the amount of increase was 3% for 22? And that would mean that rates would have to be higher in the subsequent year. Revenue would have to be increased in subsequent year, not 3.98 for 23, but 4.85. And that's to catch up for the amount of revenue that wouldn't be increased for 2022. We did another round of analysis to project what would be the impact in future years if there was a 2% increase, just to kind of keep up with a bit of inflation for 2022. And you see the rate of increase for 23 is even higher. And we've kept the out years, the projected years of 24, 5, and 6 the same, because those two rates of increases are necessary in order to keep the capital programs that Mr. Tripp described, including Water 2025, on schedule. And then in the third example, the zero increase for 22 would create the necessity of a 10% water increase for 2023. So the impact begins to compound due to that 1 year's delay in revenue increase. And then also I have a row here related to the amount of bonds, and that I hope illustrates the necessity of the increase in revenue in both 22 and 23 that necessitates or facilitates the repayment of the bonds, $158 million to be issued in 22. That has to be done assuming a revenue increase for 2023. So these are the idea of phasing these rate increases, but really it just defers the amount of revenue that's needed in future years and makes that more challenging and a different impact to residents during 22 or 23. I want to just give you a moment to take a look at those, and then I'll move forward to the next couple of questions from City Council, and we can come back to this as well if there might be any questions. But I'll just go to question 2, and these are in the staff report, of course, which are visible for the public as well. The second question is, can we delay water 2025 for a couple of years to 27? The answer is yes, but there would be consequences, and we don't recommend those. The risk of water shed fire and other events that could decrease drinking water quality and safety would be of greater risk. And there are some examples in 2021 along the Front Range that our Public Works and Utilities staff could illustrate. We have some material if that's of interest, but we don't recommend that because this presents a risk to our community. Also, objectively, project costs will increase due to construction cost escalation, which is, we've discussed before, is quite aggressive in this current economic climate. We estimate about $13 million in inflation over the 2 years. And in addition, our pro forma, our plans call for Semper retiring at a date certain in the future. If that were to be extended, we would need to invest $4 million over those 2 years into the Semper facility to extend its life beyond what's currently planned. So in addition to the risk to the water quality, there's also the increasing cost. So it could be done, but there would be consequences as I've outlined here. And then finally, the third question and my final slide is, how does staff know that replacing the current Semper water treatment facility is the right path forward? And we attached not the entire study performed by CH2M, but the executive summary to your staff report tonight. And it determined that the replacement of the Semper facility was the most cost-effective method going forward. And I've got a photograph here that illustrates hopefully the age of the Semper facility. And if we can go back a slide, I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared to go to that. We can go back one slide. Sorry, I think yep, there we go. Of course, this is a flyover once Semper was active for our community. Of course, we've paved those roads all around the plant, and it really illustrates the changes that have occurred in the community. But clearly, we believe that the 2015 master plan performed by CH2M outlines, again, the most cost-effective method going forward. We're happy to answer any questions or address any of the inputs into the CH2M master plan. So again, we think that this is the right path forward and the right timing going forward. And again, hopefully provides an overview and details. So with that, Mr. Tripp, if you have some closing comments, we'll be available to answer any questions about the phased rates or any other comments regarding the capital plan. Thank you.
Larry, thank you. And thanks to the Public Works Utility staff for their work on this. You know, my only concluding comments are that we just need to get to a number that we can get on an agenda and be certain it's going to have your approval. And Mayor, I'd like your help getting to that tonight. We don't have anything else to add tonight. The 3.98 number, you know, even now is a bit shaky because of inflation, the way it's gone. We would work with that. We have a long period of time to continue to generate revenue to meet the needs of the capital program, but we do believe we need to move into the next phase of construction and sell bonds in 2022. So we would be back, we're going to be back in front of the council in 2022 to set that rate for 2023 to make sure we can secure those bonds and get moving forward on this project. Unless you elect to move the project back tonight, and you can do that, and that, you know, that is an option that you have. So I really, I guess I would really just say that there is no reason for us to do anything but give you our best recommendation that we believe is in the best interest of the community and that we believe is necessary to provide secure water. People have said to me, well, are you being overly conservative? Are you being overly aggressive? The answer to that is we're providing, for us, it's an answer that we've got to provide that we're all comfortable with. We just have a great deal of trust and respect in the professionals in our department. And that's where we are. And Mayor and Council, if you can help me this evening by helping me understand the number that you'll be able to approve.
I guess I'd like to open it up to council if anyone wants to volunteer first where they're at before I poll, or if they have remaining questions or comments. Councilor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to stick my neck out, Mr. Tripp. And this is no disrespect to anyone on staff for the hard work that they put into this. But we have another bucket here too. And it's the bucket that I hear about from our residents is there's that checkbook that they have to write that bill out of every month. And this is not an open market. There is no competition. They have to pay what they're billed. And the recommendations and the restructuring of those recommendations to rebalance who paid for what in 2018, I think had a greater effect on our residents than people imagined at that time. Because it's what you can pay and what you can ultimately give up when you look at not just water rates, but fixed cost fees, sewer fees, and all the changes that were lumped together in that process. And they've spoken loud and clear to me, and they can't pay anymore. And so that's where I'm at. So I appreciate that.
What's that number?
0. I wanted to be just spot on that, so there's no doubt where I stand.
All right. Next, we have Councilor Smith.
Thank you for attaching the recommendation from, I think you said it was HDR. I can't remember or CH2, I'm sorry, not HDR. There were a couple of things that stood out to me in that study. And one of the first bulleted items in it is that, and it reads, the condition of the existing treatment facility as it stands today is not the main driver of the recommendation of a new treatment facility at a new location, which in my process throughout time on council, even prior, my understanding was it's the age of the condition. And that's why we are needing the replacement of this treatment plant. But it does say that the existing water treatment facilities do not meet the city's potable water demands. So we're not meeting potable water demands and meeting reliability goals now, and the problem will worsen as increased growth occurs within a service area. So then this is the original problem that I've had with this is because the narrative seems to continue to change. What is the core issue is it growth? We've said it's not because of growth. We've said that we've had enough water for all of our developments that we've put in place in past years and even up until yesterday. And so this is what makes me question and what makes our residents question. And I think much to the mayor's point as far as being clear in what we're trying to do, that's one of the biggest issues that I have with this. Do I think that we need to take care of our infrastructure and maintain our facilities and what we have? Absolutely. Do I think it's the right timing? I'm not seeing it. Even in this report, it says our conditions aren't horrible. It's not the reason for the suggestion to replace. So much to Councillor Seymour's point, I can't, there's not enough data, there's not enough information to move that needle for me on increasing the rates on getting us there. So I am 0, or if we can look at reducing, but I can't approve these rates that are presented.
Mayor, first, before I go on to Mayor Pro Tem Demont, do you want to respond, or is there anyone from staff that would like to answer Councillor Smith's concerns in regards to the CH2M report?
We spent dozens of hours talking about age and condition and providing the building block background to that.
Okay.
I apologize, you don't believe it.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Demont.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quick question on the audit from 2015. In that, I know often we go out to bid and we do, have different consultants. Was that in that time frame, say between 2010, 2015, was that the only outside audit done? Were there other recommendations that ever came forward, or is that the only one that you guys received?
Max, do you have an answer to that?
I think you're referring to the water treatment master plan. It's okay. It's not an audit. It was a master plan that we commissioned to look at the entire water treatment process. Subsequent to that, as part of that, it evaluated 7 different alternatives. Some of those were developed during the course of that, as it became obvious that some of those options needed to be split into 2 different parts. And ultimately, it was 7 different options that were looked at, looking at the life cycle costs as a key tool in there, as well as the non-monetary benefits of each of those 7. It's not all that common that you get congruence between the best technical alternative and the most cost-effective alternative. But in fact, that's exactly what we got this time. The alternative described in that executive summary as alternative 4B, which is what we've been pursuing for the last 6 years, is the technically most effective, as well as the most cost-effective over the life cycle of the water treatment plant.
Sure, and I understand that that's been the consistent point of view. I guess, but my question was out of those other options, was that for the master plan, when you went out and you had an outside group come in and help evaluate what we had and make that master plan recommendation, or those options, were the options all through one firm, or was there another firm that gave some of those options that were not taken?
I'm not sure that I understand that question. Maybe this would help. No, that's not the first time this has ever been studied. In fact, in 2006, 2011, we had similar, I'll call them water treatment, as well as wastewater treatment evaluations and master plans done by a firm called URS. You would find, if you look through those, you would find the pattern begins long before 2015, that we were on a course to need to look at a solution, a long-term solution for the replacement or the upgrade of Semper water treatment facility. You got to remember, it was built with 1960s technology. It's providing clean water, reliable water today, and that's the essence of the statement that Councillor Smith quoted right out of the executive summary. That's right, because we have the best water treatment superintendent and staff that works for him who every day make sure that happens. There's no doubt in my mind that we're taking care of our customer today. But if you look at the other factors that are involved there, it's unequivocal. Whether you talk about the demand management, the technology, the changing climate, the changing regulation, the age and condition of that facility, they all point to the same thing. It's unequivocal. This plant needs to be built, period, sooner than later. But there's, in my most professional opinion, there is no way around it. This is the right answer, period.
I appreciate your point of view. However, I don't share it. And that's, not by any stretch of thinking anybody on the staff isn't capable or professional. I really appreciate all the conversations that we've had over the 4 years that I've been here, and the professionalism in those conversations. I shared before, there's always multiple paths. I do my own level of operational work, and there's always multiple paths to complete a task. For me, this gets to the same thing that Councilor Seymour alluded to. I've heard loud and clear from the residents before I was on council. I mean, it was something that I ran on, that I felt and saw our water becoming too unaffordable. And at the end of the day, we do need to deliver clean drinking water, but people also need to be able to afford their water. They need to be able to afford their homes that they purchased and decided to spend their life in. I think that there is a path that allows us to continue to build infrastructure that we need, as well as accommodate the issues that we've seen with people being priced out of their homes and not being able to care for their yards anymore. That goes into so many different directions, between paying your bills and keeping your property value up, understanding there are options to try to mitigate some of that water usage. But where I am at is I cannot continue down this path. And I also would say, I understand there's always going to be increased cost. There's always going to be increased to our rates. However, I think that we need to go back and reevaluate what we did in 2018. We need to reevaluate how the tier structure is, so that it's not so heavy-handed for people who have bought big lots. I do think as a city, and I'm glad to see that both through the leadership of the staff, the city manager, and the council, that we are looking forward about how we don't get people into those same situations with new builds. However, people bought what they bought, and trying to change that is a difficult thing. So at this point, to not belabor anymore, I'm not in favor of any increase this year until we go back and evaluate what we did in 2018.
Councilor Scully.
Thank you, ma'am. So I've been thinking about this nonstop for weeks. It might be months. I think I've lost track of time. So when we voted on this previously, I said that I would not support it because we were sitting in a time of COVID. And I didn't feel that we were out of that yet. And I still don't believe we're out of it, but I do think we are moving closer. And I've come to the awareness that we are looking at 2022. And I do think that 2022 will be very different from 2021. I think we have seen a vast change just in the last 6 months. And thus, I think I have to reverse what I said, because I think that we do have to look forward. Tonight's presentation was very telling to me. I appreciate the work the staff did to answer my 2 questions. It is shocking to me how much the increases would be in the following years. And I don't want to put further burden on residents in future years. I would rather spread this out evenly, smoothly, as I think the term was used in the last presentation, over time. So I do, at this point, believe that the 3.98 rate would be the correct increase at this time. I also want to talk to the water treatment center. So I have toured our water treatment centers. I've toured much of our water facilities. I've done the sewer system. I walked the big dry creek. And when you see the difference between the Northwest Treatment Center and the Semper Treatment Center, there's a huge difference. It is clear that there were many years between the building of those two treatment centers. It is clear to me, as I have looked through Semper, knowing that there are whole parts of it that actually don't even function anymore. They're in a room on the side. I began my career at Rocky Flats, and I have to tell you, some of those rooms kind of reminded me of that. I think we need a new treatment center. I trust the staff saying we need a new treatment center. Our staff is thinking for the sustainability of our city. How are we going to continue to live the way we are accustomed to living into the future? I would not wait to replace my home furnace or my home sewers until they were broken. That doesn't do me any good. I wouldn't be able to rely on heat. I think this is the same situation. I don't want to see us wait until it's broken and then we're in a mess. We have some communities around us that have experienced water challenges this summer. And 2 of them went on boil orders this summer. And it was distressing. Maybe not to everyone, but I was distressed. I was thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to have to boil my water. It is inconvenient. It is unhealthy. I don't want to do this. And I don't want the residents of Westminster to have to do this. And then I've spent a lot of time in Grand Lake this summer. Go up to Grand Lake, there's a lot of burned forest up there. Grand Lake is having a real hard time with their watershed right now. It is a main topic of conversation in Grand Lake. What are they going to do? Because it's not protected anymore. And this is something that our staff has brought to us over and over, our watershed. It is in danger and we need to do something to protect it. So I am in favor and supportive of the staff. Build a new water treatment center, protect that watershed. Protect our water at all costs because it is our resource. It is what we are responsible for, and we must make sure we keep clean water for our community. Final thought is, nobody ever raises water rates and says, yeah, I did that. I was so excited to do that. Nobody ever says that. I'm raising water rates on my friends and my neighbors and myself. I pay a water bill too, and it is hard. It is costly. But I also value the water I have in my community. I value the fact that when I turn my faucet on, my water flows freely. I value the fact that I can take a shower and I don't have to worry about it. I value the fact that I can flush my toilet at any time of the day. I value that I can wash my clothes at any time of the day and my dishes. And I do value the fact that I have green grass and I get to water my grass. I will tell you that working as a city councilor, I am reevaluating my yard because I understand now the impact of watering our yards in this community. We have got to reevaluate how we live in this community. We are a high desert community. Semi-arid is how I would have termed it, but I've heard it referred to as high desert. And we have to acknowledge that and we have to rethink how we do it because I don't think we've been doing it correctly for a while. So I appreciate the staff's work. You have my vote tonight. You have my trust. Go forth.
Councilor Bowles, do you have any comments on which of the proposed rate?
Well, I think the purpose of tonight was to get direction to staff, and I think we have that already. So a lot's been said about this. I've consistently, on my time on council, 2.5 years, supported responsible investment in our infrastructure. But I think you have your direction. We have 6 people, you have 3 votes against. So I think for any rate beyond the 0%. So I don't think I need to say much more than that.
We've talked a lot about water, and I can understand some fatigue from members of staff, members of this council, and probably members of the community in regards to the conversation, particularly when it seems that it's such a positional conversation that no amount of data is enough to get anyone out of their entrenched positions. And it's frustrating. And I don't know if it's stewardship. You know, it might be a fait accompli already. But I have to say, there was a comment made earlier about an additional variable that hadn't been taken into account, which was our residents. And I want to remind my colleagues that we had a rate equity study, that we have compared our rates to make sure they weren't out of line with what is considered affordable nationally, that we had lots of public input on this, that I won an election after voting on these rates. And in fact, I was the only person in that election who had voted on water rates, and I won. Our residents have spoken, and some are very upset about water rate increases, and some are very supportive of us investing in public health and safety. But we haven't turned a blind eye or a deaf ear to the actual impacts in the pocketbook. We've created and expanded programs that give assistance to folks who are struggling to pay bills. We've expanded assistance to folks who need assistance in changing their use of landscaping to go to more water conscious decisions. I believe most of us have toured Semper. And so it surprises me when I have heard comments that we don't need to replace it. We have dedicated professionals that have no gain out of this recommendation other than to serve our community. And yet consistently their recommendations are second guessed. People are considered experts that worked in the utility a decade or more ago rather than the people that work there today. And I don't think this has been a healthy conversation for our community. We saw tonight, if you care about costs for residents, it doesn't go away by deferring this, by delaying it, by putting our head in the sand. You can't make a problem go away by not addressing it. And so tonight, I stand by my original decision to support the full recommendation of staff. If you care about the cost to our residents, they will only increase by delaying this. So I know I'm not going to change anyone's mind on this tonight, but I am very disappointed. And I think our community deserved better. So with that, I think you have your direction.
We'll come back with 0. Just to clarify something, we made the recommendation we made because we do feel a responsibility to the community.
There are no other items before us tonight. This adjourns the special study session of the Westminster City Council.